Snow whipped across Manhattan like shards of broken glass when Brandon Slate shoved his pregnant wife, Evelyn Hart, out of the black Mercedes and into the freezing night. Her coat was barely buttoned, her hands shaking as she steadied herself against the curb outside the Rosemont Hotel. Inside, chandeliers glowed like golden suns, catching flashes from paparazzi already circling the arriving celebrities. Brandon didn't even look at her. His hand was wrapped tight around the waist of Roxy Vale, the rising model he had traded his marriage for, as if he couldn't wait one more second to parade her beneath those lights. Evelyn felt her breath hitch, the cold slicing through her like a warning she should have heard months ago. 6 months pregnant, exhausted from holding together a life that had cracked in silence, she tried calling Brandon's name. He turned just enough for her to see the smirk on his face, an expression that said she was no longer part of his world. "You shouldn't be here, Evelyn," he said flatly. "Go home, or wherever women like you go." "Women like you." The words hit harder than the wind. A camera flash caught Evelyn's pale face, her trembling hands, her swollen belly. The murmurs began instantly, some pitying, others cruel. Roxy only tightened her grip on Brandon's arm, whispering something that made him laugh loud enough for the crowd to hear. Evelyn took a step back. Her body ached, her child kicked as if startled by the chaos, and for a moment she feared she might collapse right there on the icy sidewalk. She had no home to return to. Brandon had taken the apartment. He had taken the money, and now he had taken what little dignity she had left. Yet someone else was watching from a distance. Someone neither she nor Brandon knew had arrived in New York that night. Someone whose presence would change everything. And he had come for Evelyn. Before the world saw her standing in the snow outside the Rosemont Hotel, Evelyn Hart had been the kind of woman people overlooked, not because she lacked beauty or grace, but because she never asked for attention. She lived quietly in a modest walk-up in Midtown, worked long shifts as an event coordinator at a mid-range hotel, and carried herself with a gentleness rare in Manhattan. Her closest coworkers described her as the person who always remembered birthdays, who stayed late when others went home, who never complained, not even when her feet swelled from pregnancy or when exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. Evelyn had been raised to believe that a calm life was a blessed one. Her mother, a warm but fragile woman, taught her to value kindness over ambition. Her father? Well, she barely remembered him. He had left early in her childhood, and every photo of him had disappeared when Evelyn was 6. Her mother never explained why, only that he lives in a world that isn't meant for us. Evelyn grew up thinking he was long gone, a ghost in old memories. What she didn't know, what the world didn't know, was that her father had built a global financial empire and watched her from afar with regret carved into every year he missed. But none of that power had touched Evelyn's life. She worked hard, lived small, and believed love was something you built brick by brick. That belief shattered the day she met Brandon Slate. He swept into her life like a summer storm, charming, ambitious, handsome, in a polished Wall Street way. He said she grounded him. He said she made life meaningful. Evelyn believed him with all the innocence of a woman raised on hope instead of caution. She cooked for him, encouraged him, celebrated every small win of his unpredictable career. When she told him she was pregnant, she thought he would lift her off the ground and kiss her with joy. Instead, Brandon grew colder. He said the timing was wrong, that she needed to look presentable if she wanted to stand beside him, that he couldn't build a future while carrying dead weight. The distance between them widened until she barely recognized the man she married. Still, Evelyn tried God. She tried. She worked extra shifts when Brandon said money was tight. She hid her nausea during meetings. She washed the dishes in silence when he came home smelling of someone else's perfume. Yet nothing prepared her for his final betrayal outside the Rosemont. And what Evelyn didn't know was that her pain had just awakened a force far more powerful than Brandon Slate could ever imagine. Because someone had seen that viral video and recognized whose daughter she was, Manhattan had a way of exposing a person's entire life under its unforgiving lights. During the day, its steel towers glittered with promise. At night, they sharpened into silhouettes that watched silently as dreams rose and crumbled. For Evelyn Hart, the city had once been a map of possibilities. She remembered drinking hot chocolate on Fifth Avenue during her first winter with Brandon, watching couples glide across the ice at Rockefeller Center. She remembered believing this place could be home. But now, every familiar street felt like it belonged to someone else. After Brandon forced her out that freezing night, Evelyn found herself walking through Midtown with no destination but the nearest subway entrance. She clutched her coat around her swollen belly, feeling the sting of each gust of wind. The skyscrapers that once inspired her now looked like monuments built for people who mattered. People with last names carved into stone, people she had never been allowed to imagine she might be connected to. The city was divided, in truth. There was the Manhattan of the elite, private elevators, suites at the Ritz-Carlton, dinners at Le Jardin on Park Avenue, deals whispered behind Mont Blanc pens and frosted office glass. And then there was Evelyn's Manhattan, subway delays, street food on rushed 10-minute breaks, and the lingering scent of industrial cleaner in every hotel ballroom she prepared for someone else's celebration. Her life had always existed in the quiet spaces between other people's victories. The event halls where she worked buzzed nightly with wealth she would never touch. She could still picture the ballroom she had spent 2 days setting up last week, crystal centerpieces imported from France, velvet-draped tables, a skyline view worth more than her entire annual salary. She had polished those wine glasses with her own hands, wiping away the fingerprints of people who would never learn her name. That was the irony. Evelyn knew every detail of how high society functioned, the seating charts, the silent hierarchy, the coded glances between powerful families. She just never imagined she was born from that world. But Manhattan had been shifting long before she realized it. The viral video of Brandon shoving her had spread faster than wildfire through both the tabloids and corporate circles. People whispered about the pregnant wife incident, analyzing it at bar counters and office elevators. Some pitied her, others mocked her, but one man, watching from a penthouse overlooking Central Park, felt something else entirely. Recognition. The city that had crushed Evelyn was about to become the stage of her rebirth. And the man in that penthouse was already preparing his next move. Brandon Slate hadn't always been cruel, but he had always been ambitious, dangerously so. Even before he met Evelyn, he'd carried a hunger for status that nothing seemed to satisfy. Born in a cramped Ohio suburb, he'd spent his childhood staring at magazines showcasing penthouses and yachts, promising himself he'd claim that world someday. But dreams without integrity rot quickly, and Brandon learned early to climb by stepping on whoever stood closest. When he arrived in New York, that hunger sharpened. He worked a mediocre corporate job, talked big, dressed big, spent big on credit he didn't have. To him, perception was everything. Actual success could come later, maybe. Meeting Evelyn was convenient. She was kind, gentle, supportive, and she didn't question where his money came from. She made him look stable, respectable, almost admirable. But the moment she became pregnant, Brandon realized she complicated his carefully curated image. Investors didn't take family men with bills seriously. They wanted sharks. So when Roxy Vale slinked into his life, he convinced himself he'd been chosen for something bigger. Roxy wasn't just a pretty face. She was calculating, strategic, and knew exactly how to appear irresistible. She had risen from a modest background in Arizona, reinventing herself one photo shoot at a time. But to enter the real elite Park Avenue dinners, Fashion Week invitations, private jets, she needed someone she could mold. Brandon fit the role perfectly, insecure, eager, and desperate for validation. To Roxy, Evelyn wasn't a threat. She was a stepping stone. When paparazzi snapped Brandon pushing Evelyn away, Roxy didn't flinch. If anything, she saw opportunity. Scandals could be spun, reputations rebuilt, sympathy weaponized. And Brandon believed every whisper she placed in his ear. You deserve someone who matches your potential. She's holding you back. People like us don't settle. Roxy played him brilliantly, but not without fear. She had secrets of her own. A falsified resume. A manager she owed money to. A past she'd buried under designer gowns and smoky photo shoots. And now that she was dating a rising name, those secrets were starting to surface in dangerous ways. Brandon didn't notice her anxiety. He was too busy polishing his new persona, scheduling interviews, and practicing the lines he'd use to explain why he left his unstable pregnant wife. He thought he was ascending. He didn't know that someone far more powerful had started digging into him line by line, lie by lie. And Brandon was about to realize he had chosen the worst possible enemy. The morning after the Rosemont incident, Evelyn Hart woke to the harsh buzz of notifications vibrating against the thin nightstand in her small borrowed room. She blinked through swollen eyes, the ache in her body pulsing with every shallow breath. She didn't have to open her phone to know something was wrong. The air itself felt heavier, as if the world had already shifted without her consent. When she finally unlocked the screen, her heart dropped. There it was, video after video, headline after headline. The clip of Brandon shoving her onto the icy sidewalk had spread across social media like wildfire. Some strangers expressed pity, but most tore her apart without hesitation. Why was she even there? She looks unstable. He made the right choice. Roxy is in a different league. End quote. Each comment was a slice, and each slice carved deeper into the woman she barely recognized anymore. But the worst blow wasn't from strangers. It came from Brandon himself. He posted a statement neatly written, carefully curated, dripping with false concern. He claimed Evelyn was emotionally unpredictable, that she'd shown up uninvited, and that he had acted out of concern for her well-being. He ended with a line that made Evelyn's hands tremble. "I hope she gets the help she needs." End quote. Quote, quote, help? As if she were broken. As if she were a problem he had escaped. And while Evelyn tried to steady her breathing, another video surfaced, this one filmed inside the Rosemont ballroom. Roxy, glowing beneath the chandeliers, was pressed against Brandon's side as photographers shouted questions. One reporter asked, "Do you feel guilty about what happened to your wife?" Roxy didn't miss a beat. She lifted her champagne glass, smiled sweetly, and replied, "Some people can't handle seeing a man move on." The crowd laughed. Brandon laughed. And Evelyn felt something inside her crack in a way that could never be repaired. Her former manager called later that afternoon not to check on her, but to inform her that the hotel had let her go. Guests were complaining. The scandal was too disruptive. They needed to protect their reputation. In 24 hours, Evelyn had lost her marriage, her home, her dignity, and now her job. But as she sat on the edge of the narrow bed, tears tracing warm paths down her cheeks, a black SUV slowed to a stop outside the building. A tall man stepped out, his expression unreadable, a leather-bound folder tucked beneath his arm. Someone had come for her, and he wasn't here to offer pity. The walls of the tiny Brooklyn room felt as though they were closing in on Evelyn Hart. It smelled faintly of old carpet and winter air, and the radiator rattled like it was protesting its own existence. She sat curled on the edge of the narrow mattress, her knees drawn up carefully so she wouldn't press too hard against her stomach. Her baby shifted gently, a reminder that even in this crushing moment, she wasn't truly alone. But loneliness didn't care about facts. It swallowed her anyway. Her phone lay face down on the blanket, still vibrating every few minutes with notifications she couldn't bring herself to read. Every headline, every cruel comment, every twisting of the truth carved deeper into the hollow that had formed in her chest. She had tried so hard to be a good wife, a patient partner, a hopeful mother, and yet here she was, shivering in a room she could barely afford, wearing the same coat Brandon had shoved her in the night before. She pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to quiet the storm inside her. It didn't work. Her thoughts spiraled. How would she pay for prenatal appointments now? What if something happened to the baby? Where would she go when the landlord realized she couldn't keep up with rent? And how could Brandon, the man she once trusted with her entire heart, abandon her so callously? The betrayal was one thing. The humiliation was another. But the fear that was what truly broke her. A sudden ache gripped her lower spine, sharp and warning. She breathed through it, hands trembling. Stress wasn't good for the baby. The doctor had warned her only 2 weeks ago that her blood pressure had risen. She remembered nodding politely, never imagining life could twist this cruelly so fast. Tears blurred her vision. "How am I going to survive this?" she whispered into the empty room. The radiator hissed in response. She stood slowly, hoping walking might calm her mind. Instead, her legs buckled beneath her. Panic surged. She reached for the wall, steadying herself as another wave of dizziness hit. Her breaths quickened, shallow and ragged. Her baby kicked again harder this time, as if sensing the chaos trembling through her body. "No, no, please," she murmured, sinking to the floor. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, firm, purposeful, not like the other tenants' sluggish drag. They stopped right outside her door. A soft knock followed, deep, steady, unmistakably confident. "Evelyn," a man's voice called, rich and controlled. "It's time we talked." And the moment she heard his name, her entire world tilted. Evelyn froze at the sound of the voice, deep, steady, unmistakably familiar in a way that didn't make sense. She hadn't heard it in more than 20 years, not since she was a little girl sitting on the edge of her mother's bed, listening to bedtime stories that always ended with a hopeful, whispered promise. "Daddy loves you." But that promise had vanished long before she understood what it meant. Her pulse hammered as she pushed herself up from the floor, steadying her breath. She reached for the door with shaking fingers, hesitating for a single heartbeat before opening it. Standing in the dim hallway was a man she had only ever seen in fading childhood memories, and recently, on the business section of every major newspaper. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal coat, silver touches at his temples, and sharp blue eyes that held a lifetime of regret. Samuel Drake, founder and CEO of Drake Equity Group. A man whose decisions could move markets. A man whose absence had shaped her entire life. "Evelyn," he said quietly, something breaking in his voice. "You look so much like your mother." Her breath caught, her throat tightening painfully. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. You can't be here," she finally managed. "Why now, after all these years?" Samuel exhaled slowly. The hallway light softened the hard lines of his face, revealing a weariness the world never saw. He held out a leather-bound folder, the same one the man in the black SUV had carried earlier. "I saw the video," he said. "The entire world saw what that man did to you, and I won't stand by again. Not this time." Evelyn shook her head, backing away as emotions twisted violently inside her: shock, disbelief, anger, an ache she had buried too deep for too long. "You left us," she whispered. "You left me." Samuel lowered his gaze. "Your mother asked me to. She wanted you far from the world I lived in, safe from the enemies I had made. I respected her wish, but I never stopped watching over you." He swallowed. "I failed you anyway." Something inside Evelyn trembled. The baby kicked softly, as if reminding her she wasn't choosing only for herself now. Samuel took a careful step forward. "I'm here to bring you home," he said, "to protect you, to give you back everything that should have been yours." Home. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She stared at the folder in his hand, at the name embossed in gold. Evelyn Grace Drake. Her real name, her birthright, her inheritance. And the moment she touched it, she felt the shift subtle, powerful, irreversible. Because this wasn't just a reunion. This was the beginning of a war. And Brandon Slate had no idea whom he had just crossed. The next morning, Evelyn Drake woke in a place that felt like another universe. The penthouse atop Drake Tower wasn't a home. It was a quiet kingdom suspended above Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows washed every corner in soft winter light. The skyline stretched endlessly, as if the entire city bowed at her feet. But Evelyn did not feel powerful. Not yet. She sat at the edge of the guest room bed, a cashmere blanket draped around her shoulders, still carrying the exhaustion of months of betrayal. Her reflection in the glass startled her. Pale cheeks, tired eyes, hair tangled from too many sleepless nights. A woman who'd been shrinking herself for years to make room for someone who never deserved her. Samuel entered softly, placing a warm cup of tea on the bedside table. "We take back your life one step at a time," he said gently. "Today, we begin." The day unfolded in ways Evelyn could never have imagined. A private physician arrived first, checking her vitals, the baby's heartbeat, her stress levels. Then came a nutritionist, a prenatal specialist, and a therapist who spoke with a kindness that made Evelyn's throat tighten. For the first time in months, she felt seen. But it wasn't until the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor that Evelyn felt the shift truly begin. A small team, Samuel trusted stylists, image consultants, wardrobe experts, waited with quiet professionalism. They treated her not like someone fragile, but like someone important. They brought out soft wool dresses, tailored coats, and elegant maternity designs that draped over her like armor. A hairstylist worked carefully, shaping her curls into a polished frame that highlighted her delicate features. A makeup artist brushed away the shadows under her eyes, not to hide what she'd endured, but to remind her of the woman underneath all the pain. When she finally stood before the mirror, Evelyn gasped. She didn't look like a discarded wife or a forgotten woman in a Brooklyn room. She looked like someone with a future, someone with a name that meant something. Her father watched quietly, pride softening the lines of his face. "You were never meant to live small," Samuel said. "They dimmed your light, we're turning it back on." Evelyn touched the mirror, almost afraid the reflection would vanish, but it stayed strong, steady, reborn. For the first time, she felt a flicker of anger mixed with clarity. Brandon hadn't just hurt her, he had underestimated her. And one day soon, she knew fate would bring them face to face again. Yet Samuel interrupted her thoughts with an unexpected revelation. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "there's something else you need to know, something about Roxy Vale." And the truth he was about to reveal would shake her harder than anything Brandon had ever done. That evening, after the stylists and consultants left, Evelyn sat alone in the quiet penthouse office overlooking the shimmering Manhattan skyline. The city glittered below like a promise she'd never believed belonged to her. Now, wrapped in a soft cream-colored sweater Samuel had insisted she wear to feel warm again, she found herself tracing the faint outline of her reflection in the glass. She looked stronger, yes, but inside, old wounds stirred. Samuel's words replayed in her mind. Brandon had not simply been cruel. He had known exactly where to strike. For years, Evelyn had hidden pieces of herself just to keep peace in their marriage. She remembered the nights she stayed up cooking his favorite meals, only for him to come home hours late, smelling of cologne she didn't own. She remembered how he dismissed her dreams of returning to school, saying, "We can't afford for you to play around with hobbies." She remembered shrinking inch by inch until she barely recognized her own shadow. Even before the pregnancy, Brandon had found ways to make her feel small. When she suggested ideas for his networking events, he laughed them off. When she bought prenatal vitamins after the doctor's recommendation, he complained they were too expensive. He had chipped away at her confidence so slowly she mistook the erosion for normalcy. The memory that hurt most was one she rarely let herself revisit. It was a dinner party months before she became pregnant. She had worn a pale blue dress she'd saved up for, hoping to look elegant beside him. But Brandon spent the night charming a group of investors, barely acknowledging her. When a woman complimented Evelyn's dress, Brandon smirked and whispered loudly enough for guests to hear, "She tries her best, as though she never quite measured up. She had laughed it off that night, pretended it didn't sting, pretended she was fine. But now, sitting above a city that had once swallowed her whole, she felt the truth settle into her bones. She had never been the problem. Brandon's cruelty had not been born from her weakness, but from his own inadequacy. He resented her softness because it highlighted his arrogance. He undermined her dreams because he feared she might outgrow him. He blamed her for their struggles because facing his failures terrified him. A soft kick from the baby brought her back to the moment. She placed both hands on her belly, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from pain, but from a dawning resolve. She would never let anyone diminish her again. Not for love, not for peace, not for survival. Just then, Samuel knocked gently and stepped inside, a troubled look clouding his expression. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "there's something I uncovered about Brandon's finances. It's worse than we thought." And when he slid the document across the desk, Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. Samuel Drake rarely allowed emotion to cross his carefully trained expression, but tonight, the tension around his jaw spoke louder than any words. He placed the folder on the desk before Evelyn, each page inside it filled with a truth he wished he didn't have to show her. "Before you read this," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something. Brandon didn't just mistreat you emotionally, he used you." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She had expected lies, betrayal, maybe even infidelity, but the gravity in her father's voice hinted at something far colder. With trembling fingers, she opened the folder. The first page hit her like a blow. Bank statements, forged signatures, her signatures attached to loans she had never taken out. Brandon had used her name to borrow money for his failing business, dozens of times. He had pawned her identity piece by piece, quietly draining her future before she even realized she possessed one. "He forged these?" Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel nodded, anger darkening his usually composed demeanor. "And that's not all. He also submitted tax filings under both your names, claiming medical expenses and business losses that never existed. If the IRS investigates, they will come after you first, because legally, you signed them. Today, it." "No," Evelyn breathed, pressing a hand to her stomach. "No, I didn't. I never signed anything like this. That's what he counted on, Samuel replied. Your trust, your innocence, your belief that marriage meant partnership. Evelyn felt the room sway. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She had known Brandon was selfish, but this was destruction, calculated and deliberate. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had built an escape route over her body. She closed her eyes, recalling every moment Brandon insisted she didn't need to worry about paperwork. Every time, he brushed her aside with a condescending smile. She had confused dismissal for stress, deception for fatigue, and manipulation for love. How long has this been going on? She asked. Nearly 3 years, Samuel answered. Long before the pregnancy. The revelation hollowed her. 3 years. 3 years where she thought they were planning a life together, where she tried to make their small apartment feel like a home, where she worked overtime shifts so he could focus on his business. Samuel reached out, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. I'm fixing it, quietly, completely. But Evelyn, this man has no boundaries, and he's about to take things further. Further? She stared at him, dread creeping up her spine. Samuel hesitated before speaking the next words. His voice low and grim. Brandon is preparing to file a restraining order against you. And Evelyn felt the world stop. While Evelyn sat in Drake Tower absorbing the cruelty of Brandon's betrayal, the man himself was lounging in a corner suite of the Lucent Hotel, his temporary victory nest. Brandon poured himself a drink, admiring the Manhattan skyline reflected in the glass windows. He felt untouchable. The scandal had boosted his publicity, and Roxy was already gaining followers by the thousands. To him, everything was unfolding perfectly. But Roxy Vale was starting to feel the cracks. She sat at the vanity, scrolling through her phone with trembling fingers. Headlines that once glorified her bold romance with Brandon had begun shifting tone. Is Roxy responsible for the pregnant wife's breakdown? Model laughs. While Evelyn Hart suffers cold or calculated, her sponsorship emails slowed. Agents hesitated. And earlier that afternoon, a man in a gray suit had approached her outside a photo shoot, handing her a sealed envelope before disappearing into traffic. Inside was a single message. We know. She tried to tell Brandon, but he waved her off with a dismissive grin. You worry too much, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. This is what attention looks like. We're winning. Winning. The word tasted bitter. Because Roxy's biggest fear wasn't the scandal. It was her own past, the one she'd buried so deep she prayed no one would ever find it. She paced the carpet, arms wrapped around herself. Brandon, what if people start digging? What if they find... They won't, he interjected. Besides, I've set things in motion. Evelyn will be forced legally to stay away. Once the restraining order is filed, public opinion shifts. She'll look unstable and will look justified. He smiled like a man who believed he controlled fate. But Roxy felt cold. What if she fights back? She asked. Brandon scoffed. She's broke, jobless, alone. What could she possibly do? Roxy didn't answer, but doubt coiled inside her. She had seen Evelyn's face in that viral video. It wasn't weakness she saw there, it was something else. Something she recognized because she'd once had it too. A fire that burned quietly until the moment it consumed everything. Brandon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smirked. It's time, he said. My lawyer just finished drafting the accusation. Emotional instability, aggressive outbursts, financial sabotage. She'll be trapped before she knows what hit her. He raised his glass, expecting Roxy to toast. But she couldn't lift her hand. Because the man in the gray suit appeared again, this time entering their hotel suite without knocking, his badge glinting under the chandelier. Mr. Slate, he said, voice calm but deadly serious. We need to talk about the allegations involving your financial activity. And Brandon's smile finally faltered. Brandon Slate's confidence evaporated the moment the man in the gray suit stepped inside the suite. He wasn't police. Worse, he carried the quiet authority of someone from a federal financial bureau. His badge gleamed under the chandelier like a warning. Mr. Slate, the man repeated, we need clarification about several suspicious transactions connected to your name. Roxy's breath tightened. She knew that tone. It belonged to people who already had answers. They were only here to confirm guilt. Brandon forced a smirk. I have no idea what you're talking about. The agent remained unmoved. These loans under Evelyn Hart's signature, your wife, are inconsistent. The handwriting analysis is inconclusive, and the lenders you approached have raised red flags. Additionally, several reports were filed by investors who claim you misrepresented your financial standing. Roxy turned toward Brandon, her voice barely above a whisper. Brandon, what did you do? He didn't look at her. Don't say anything. They have nothing. But he was wrong. The agent placed a stack of documents on the table. We advise you to retain legal counsel. You'll be contacted for a formal interview. The man left as quietly as he arrived, but the silence he left behind was suffocating. Roxy rounded on Brandon. You told me everything was fine, that your business was stable. Brandon's mask cracked. And it would have been if Evelyn hadn't fallen apart and made everything messy. Roxy stared at him, horrified. Fallen apart? You pushed her into the street, Brandon. You humiliated your pregnant wife. He waved her off. People forget scandals. They won't forget success. Once the restraining order is filed, she'll be discredited. The timing is perfect. The narrative is... Brandon? Roxy interrupted, her voice unsteady. I don't think you understand what's happening. That man wasn't here because of Evelyn's breakdown. Someone powerful is behind this. Brandon scoffed. No one cares enough to protect Evelyn. She's a nobody. But Roxy wasn't convinced. She remembered the envelope. We know. She remembered the way photographers kept asking about Evelyn, not her. She remembered the quiet fear spreading through the modeling agencies. Someone did care about Evelyn, and not just as sympathy. Trying to calm herself, Roxy stepped into the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her face, gripping the marble sink. But the moment she looked up, she saw something taped to the mirror. A photograph. Her, 12 years younger. A mugshot. She staggered back, breath ripped from her lungs. Someone had found her buried past. And as she reached trembling for the photo, her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. You chose the wrong side. And Roxy realized she wasn't the only one Brandon had put in danger. 2 weeks after discovering the full extent of Brandon's betrayal, Evelyn Hart stood inside the grand lobby of the Plaza Hotel, this time not as an invisible event coordinator, not as a discarded wife, but as the daughter of Samuel Drake. The air shimmered with the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, violins warming the background, and the scent of white orchids drifting through velvet-draped hallways. Manhattan's elite moved like constellations beneath golden ceilings. But Evelyn wasn't here to dazzle them. She was here to reclaim her story. Samuel had insisted she attend tonight's charity gala, a cornerstone event where alliances were built, reputations made, and sometimes destroyed. He believed it was time the city learned who she truly was. And more importantly, it was time Brandon realized what he had thrown away. Dressed in a midnight blue maternity gown tailored to her new silhouette, Evelyn walked beside Samuel, her hand lightly holding his arm. Her hair framed her face softly, her steps confident yet careful. Conversations paused as they entered, heads turned, eyes widened. It was the same woman from the viral video, yet not the same at all. Evelyn now carried a quiet power, the kind that came not from wealth but from surviving something meant to break her. Guests whispered, "That's her. She looks radiant. Is that Samuel Drake with her?" Evelyn kept her chin lifted, though her heart raced beneath the silk fabric. She had never been in a room where people looked at her with curiosity instead of dismissal. Miles Rowan, CEO of Rowan Tech and one of Samuel's trusted partners, approached with a warm smile. He was calm, confident, his presence grounding in a way Evelyn hadn't expected. "You must be Evelyn," Miles said, offering his hand. "Your father speaks highly of you." It took her a second to respond. She wasn't used to being spoken to with such respect. "It's nice to meet you," she said softly. Miles's gaze flicked to her belly, not with judgment but gentle admiration. "You're stronger than you realize," he said. "Stronger than most people in this room." Evelyn felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, an ember of possibility. But the moment was cut short. A sudden hush rippled through the ballroom. Photographers lifted their cameras, the crowd parted like water. Brandon Slate had arrived, and Roxy stood on his arm, dressed in glittering silver, her smile tight and trembling. They saw Evelyn, they froze, and for the first time since the nightmare began, Evelyn did not look away. Across the ballroom, Brandon's expression shifted from arrogance to shock to something close to fear. because he finally realized Evelyn was not the woman he thought he had destroyed. Brandon Slate had prepared himself for applause, admiration, and another opportunity to polish the narrative he'd been feeding the press. But the moment he stepped into the plaza's ballroom and saw Evelyn standing beside Samuel Drake, all the oxygen seemed to vanish from his lungs. He staggered just slightly, but enough for Roxy Vale to feel his grip tighten painfully around her arm. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why is she here? And why is she with him?" Whoa. Brandon couldn't answer, because even he, in his inflated sense of self-importance, understood exactly what that pairing meant. Samuel Drake wasn't just another wealthy face in Manhattan. He was a titan, a man whose presence in any room shifted the balance of power. And Evelyn stood beside him like she had every right to be there. Her posture was poised, serene, but the strength in her gaze struck Brandon like a blow. Gone was the trembling woman on the sidewalk. Gone was the one he mocked for being too emotional. The Evelyn before him radiated a quiet authority that made his chest tighten with something dangerously close to panic. Roxy, however, was unraveling. She tried to maintain her smile for the cameras, but her eyes darted anxiously around the room. The envelope, the photograph, the message "you chose the wrong side" echoed inside her mind like a drumbeat. The lights felt too bright, the crowd too watchful. "Brandon," she whispered again, "we should leave." But he couldn't move. Pride fused him to the floor. Miles Rowan approached Evelyn and Samuel, greeting them with an easy warmth that only heightened Brandon's dread. The three of them looked united, powerful, untouchable. Then Miles glanced across the room and met Brandon's eyes. He didn't scowl, didn't glare. He simply smiled, a calm, confident smile that said, "You already lost." Brandon felt heat surge into his face. "How is this possible?" he muttered under his breath. "She's nobody. She's—" Roxy flinched. "She doesn't look like nobody." Brandon clenched his jaw. No, this is a stunt. She's doing this to embarrass me." But even he didn't believe that. Unable to stop himself, he dragged Roxy across the ballroom. Guests turned, whispers rising like a tide. Evelyn saw him coming. She didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't hide. Brandon forced a smile, the kind he thought could bend reality to his will. "Evelyn," he said through clenched teeth, "you look different." Evelyn met his gaze, calm and unshaken. "Thank you," she replied. "I am." It was the first time Brandon felt truly powerless. But before he could respond, Samuel stepped forward, just slightly, claiming his place at Evelyn's side with effortless authority. "Mr. Slate," Samuel said, voice low, "there's a conversation we need to have." And every camera in the room swung toward them at once. For a long moment, the ballroom at the plaza existed in silence. Cameras flashed, champagne glasses paused midair, and conversations froze as the city's richest and most ruthless watched the confrontation unfold like a live-action scandal. But while Brandon bristled under the attention, Evelyn remained impossibly composed. A soft winter breeze drifted in from the terrace, stirring the delicate fabric of her midnight blue gown. The diamonds at her ears, simple, elegant, caught the golden light and turned her into the quiet focal point of the entire room. This was not the Evelyn Hart who once blended into hotel hallways. This was Evelyn Drake. She felt the power of that truth fill her lungs. Miles Rowan stepped subtly closer, as if offering silent protection. His presence alone, steady, respectful, deliberate, added weight to the moment. Even Samuel watched carefully, giving Evelyn space to lead her own story. Brandon, however, could not comprehend the shift. He was sweating through his tailored suit, trying to reclaim the arrogant swagger he'd relied on for years. "So this is the game now?" he hissed. "Parading around like royalty? Acting like you belong here?" Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her expression almost pitying. "Brandon," she said softly, "I'm not acting." The ballroom murmured. Several guests exchanged knowing glances. Others pulled out their phones, sensing something monumental unfolding. Roxy Vale stood frozen beside Brandon. Her eyes darted nervously between the powerful figures surrounding Evelyn. Every whisper reminded her of the message taped to her bathroom mirror. Her hands trembled, her smile faltered. Evelyn took a steady breath, one hand resting gently on her belly. "For years," she began, her voice clear, "I let myself believe I was small because you needed me to be small. but that version of me no longer exists. Brandon snorted, desperate to regain control. Please. You can't even survive without... Miles stepped forward, his tone calm but piercing. Careful, Slate. You might want to know who you're talking to before you embarrass yourself further. Brandon glared. And who exactly is she supposed to be? Samuel finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of an empire. My daughter, he said, and the rightful heir to Drake Equity Group. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. The shock on Brandon's face was immediate, pure, unfiltered disbelief. Roxy staggered back as if the words had physically shoved her. Evelyn held Brandon's gaze, letting the truth settle. This, she said quietly, is who I've always been. You just never cared to see it. Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but a loud commotion erupted near the entrance. Guests turned as security rushed in, followed by 2 federal agents. One pointed directly at Brandon. Brandon Slate, the agent announced, we need you to come with us. Thanks for watching. Possible see, end quote. And the ballroom exploded in whispers. Every eye locked on the man who once believed he was untouchable. The ballroom, already holding its breath from the confrontation, fell into a stunned silence as the federal agents approached. But Samuel Drake raised a steady hand, signaling them to pause. Everything about him, the calm authority, the unshakable presence, forced the room to still. This will be handled properly, Samuel said to the agents, his voice smooth but firm. But before we proceed, there is something the public should understand. He turned toward the crowd with a graceful certainty that came from decades of commanding boardrooms and shifting markets. His attention then shifted to Evelyn, standing radiant under the chandelier's warm glow. For years, Samuel continued, I have kept my daughter out of the spotlight for her safety, but tonight it is time the world knows the truth. Evelyn Grace Drake is the sole heir to the Drake family estate and the successor to Drake Equity Group. A wave of gasps spread across the ballroom like a sudden storm. Roxy nearly collapsed into a nearby chair, her knees visibly shaking. The message in the envelope, we know, no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a prophecy fulfilled. Her eyes darted toward Brandon, silently begging him to understand the gravity of what they were facing. He didn't. Brandon's face twisted between disbelief and panic, his pride battling reality. This is a joke, he spat. She's nobody. She can't be. Miles Rowan cut him off sharply. She's more than you could ever comprehend. Samuel stepped closer to Brandon, his eyes glinting with a steel that softened only for Evelyn. You thought she was powerless, he said. You built your plans on her supposed helplessness. You forged her name, exploited her trust, humiliated her publicly, end quote. His voice grew colder. And you did all of it believing no one would protect her. Brandon's jaw clenched. You can't prove anything. Oh, we can, Samuel replied. Every forged document, every unauthorized signature, every fraudulent loan, my legal team has it all. You didn't just harm my daughter, you committed federal crimes. The federal agents nodded. Roxy began to cry silently, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She whispered, Brandon, what did you do? But he didn't turn toward her. His world was collapsing too quickly. Guests murmured excitedly, phones recording every second. The very crowd Brandon dreamed of impressing now witnessed his downfall in real time. Samuel looked to the agents. You may proceed. One agent stepped forward. Mr. Slate, you are under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, identity, falsification, and financial misrepresentation. You'll need to come with us. And Fort 1. Brandon staggered backward as if struck. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. But before the agents escorted him out, Evelyn stepped forward. Her eyes met Brandon's not with hatred, but clarity. Everything you did, she said softly, you did because you believed I was small. You never bothered to see who I really was. Brandon swallowed hard. Evelyn, you should save your excuses, she whispered. You're going to need them. I would not. And it wasn't the agents, but someone else who stepped into the light next, ready to finish what Samuel had begun. As Brandon Slate stood cornered beneath the chandeliers of the plaza, the room seemed to pulse with judgment. The federal agents waited at his shoulder, their patience thin. But it was the man who stepped forward next, Miles Rowan, who made Brandon's stomach twist. Miles, with his calm confidence and razor-sharp gaze, approached like someone accustomed to dismantling empires with a signature and a quiet smile. "Before the agents escort you out," Miles said, "there's one more matter to address." Brandon blinked. "What matter? I don't even know you." "Oh, but I know you," Miles replied. "Drake Equity Group and Rowan Tech have been collaborating for nearly a decade, and when you targeted Evelyn, you unintentionally made yourself our problem." End quote. Samuel nodded in agreement, allowing Miles to take the lead. Miles lifted a folder, sleek, black, embossed with silver lettering. "This morning, my board and Samuel's approved a joint acquisition. As of precisely 5:17 p.m., the majority shares of Slate Financial Holdings, your company, now belong to us." A hush fell so thick the musicians on stage stopped playing mid-note. Brandon sputtered. "That's impossible. You can't just—" "We can," Miles interrupted smoothly. "And we did. You sold off your shares months ago to cover your debt. The shell companies that purchased them?" He paused, letting Brandon's fear bloom. "They were ours." Roxy gasped, covering her mouth. "Brandon? Oh my God." Miles continued, ruthless but composed. "Your remaining stake has been frozen under the fraud investigation. You no longer hold voting power, financial control, or leadership authority. Slate Financial Holdings will be restructured, audited thoroughly, and placed under new management." "Whose management?" Brandon choked out. Miles's smile was quiet but decisive. "Evelyn's." The ballroom erupted, a tidal wave of shock. And for the first time, Evelyn felt the weight of possibility settle onto her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a reclamation. Brandon lunged forward, desperation cracking his voice. "She can't run a company. She doesn't know anything." End quote. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady. "I know enough to recognize what integrity looks like, something you've never had." Brandon shook his head violently, pointing at Samuel. "You're doing this to destroy me." Samuel replied calmly, "No, you did that to yourself. We're just cleaning up what's left." At that moment, the federal agents placed a hand on Brandon's arm. But before they led him away, Roxy Vale, white as marble, stepped out of the spotlight. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the mugshot photo that had been taped to her mirror. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice cracking, "there's something you need to know. Something about me and about the man who sent this." And when she revealed the name on the back, Evelyn's heart dropped. The ballroom's golden lights flickered against Roxy's trembling hands as she clutched the worn mugshot photo. Her breath came shallow, uneven. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her, not out of admiration, but dread-soaked curiosity. The glamorous facade she had built, photo by photo, lie by lie, cracked under the weight of what she was about to expose. Evelyn stepped forward, cautious but steady. "Roxy," she said softly, "what do you need to tell me?" Roxy swallowed hard. "This photo, it's me. I was arrested when I was 17 for identity fraud." A few guests gasped. Roxy flinched. "I was desperate, homeless. I stole someone's information to survive. I paid for it. I rebuilt my life. I tried to start clean." Evelyn didn't speak. She waited. "But someone found that record," Roxy continued. "Someone powerful. Someone who warned me that if I didn't cooperate, my past would be used to destroy me." She lifted her gaze to Evelyn, eyes shimmering with guilt. "I didn't know who he was at first, but now I do." Evelyn's heart thudded. "Who sent you this?" Roxy turned the photo over, revealing a handwritten name. Evelyn's father. A ripple of shock swept the room. Samuel Drake's calm expression did not change, but the slightest tightening at the corner of his mouth revealed truth Evelyn wasn't prepared to confront. "I didn't send that," Samuel said evenly, "but I know who did." Roxy's voice broke. "It was Roland Pierce." The ballroom reacted instantly. Roland Pierce, a name synonymous with corporate intimidation. A former rival of Samuel's. A man known for weaponizing information. A man banished silently from high finance after crossing the Drake family years ago. Evelyn whispered, "Why would he send this to you?" Roxy wrung her shaking hands. "Because Brandon wasn't the only one being manipulated. Pierce wanted leverage. He wanted inside access to Samuel Drake. He thought he could use me to get to you." "Me?" Evelyn breathed. Roxy nodded miserably. "You're the heir. Taking you down would destabilize everything your father built. Brandon was just the perfect pawn, desperate, reckless, arrogant. Brandon, now pale and trembling, shook his head violently. No, no, I didn't know. I didn't know anyone else was involved. Miles Rowan stepped closer to Evelyn, his voice low but protective. Pierce has resurfaced. And he's targeting the Drake family again. The realization hit Evelyn like a cold wave. Brandon wasn't the mastermind. Roxy wasn't the worst threat. A hidden enemy, a man with the resources to ruin reputations and orchestrate quiet destruction, had been pulling strings behind the scenes. Samuel's voice rumbled with controlled fury. Pierce made his first move. Now he'll expect a counterstrike. Evelyn lifted her chin. Then he'll get one. But behind the ballroom doors, someone was already preparing Pierce's next attack, aimed not at Samuel, but at Evelyn herself. The fallout began before Evelyn even left the plaza. Within hours, every major news outlet from financial journals to celebrity tabloids carried 3 explosive headlines. Heiress Evelyn Drake returns, exposes husband Brandon Slate for fraud. Roxy Vale's secret past, uncovered ties to corporate blackmail. Roland Pierce suspected in new power scheme. If Manhattan had been whispering before, now it was roaring. Samuel's legal team worked through the night while security personnel spread across Drake Tower, scanning for vulnerabilities. Miles Rowan stayed close, quietly supporting Evelyn as reporters camped outside, their floodlights turning the winter streets into a battlefield. But through the chaos, Evelyn felt strangely calm. Not because she wasn't afraid she was, but because she finally understood her own strength. For the first time, she was standing in her truth, not hiding from it. Still, Pierce's involvement changed everything. He wasn't like Brandon, messy, arrogant, predictable. Pierce played chess while others played checkers. He didn't care about humiliation, he cared about empire. And bringing down Samuel Drake's daughter, that would be his masterpiece. As predicted, Pierce made his next move before dawn. A fabricated story surfaced online, accusing Evelyn of faking her pregnancy for sympathy. Dozens of bot accounts amplified it, posting edited photos claiming she had been caught without a bump. Miles barged into Samuel's office with his tablet. "This is coordinated," he said. "Pierce is trying to discredit her before the board votes on the transition plan next quarter." Evelyn read the comments, cold, vicious, relentless. It didn't hurt the way Brandon's betrayal had hurt, but it tightened something inside her. A protective fire. "This isn't just about me," she said. "He's attacking my child." Samuel's gaze softened, the rare vulnerability of a powerful man facing an old enemy. "He wants control. He always has, and he believes striking you will destabilize me." "Then let's destabilize him," Evelyn replied. Miles blinked, then smiled slowly. There she is. With Samuel's approval, Evelyn held a press conference on the top floor of Drake Tower. Cameras lined the hall, journalists jostling for position, the Manhattan skyline glowing behind her like a crown. Evelyn stepped up to the podium, hands resting firmly on her belly. "My name is Evelyn Grace Drake," she began, "and I will not be silenced by lies, intimidation, or men who believe power means the right to destroy others." Her voice didn't waver. She spoke of truth, of resilience, of reclaiming her narrative. The city watched. And for the first time, Evelyn wasn't just a headline, she was a force. But just as she finished, Miles hurried to her side, his expression darkened by urgent news. "Evelyn," he whispered, "Pierce just made his boldest move yet. He's coming after you directly. And the next strike wouldn't be digital, it would be face-to-face. Well, our story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, my friend, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a way words can barely explain. Maybe you saw a bit of yourself in Evelyn, her hurt, her strength, her quiet comeback. Life can break us in places we never expected, but as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, the obstacle is the way. Sometimes, the very thing meant to destroy us becomes the thing that shapes us into who we're meant to be. Evelyn's story reminds us that dignity is worth protecting, that truth always rises, and that walking away from what hurts is not weakness, it's rebirth. And just like her, you deserve a life where you're respected, supported, and loved without conditions. So if tonight you feel a little stronger, a little braver, or a little more hopeful, I'm glad you stayed. And now, my wonderful friends, if this story moved you, even for a moment, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that heal, empower, and remind you of your own strength. You're not alone, and your comeback is closer than you think.